The day I lost my job after my accident, my daughter looked me in the eye and said, "You can't take care of me anymore. I'm leaving." I had sacrificed everything for her. What she didn't know would change both our lives forever. My name is Claire Davison, I'm 58, and the day I lost my job after the accident was the same day my daughter walked out of my life. The cast on my leg was still fresh, white plaster that smelled like hospitals and endings, and I was propped up on the couch with pillows I'd carefully arranged before she came home from school. I'd practiced what I'd say, how I'd reassure her that we'd be fine, that disability payments would come through, that mothers always find a way. She stood in the doorway with her backpack still on, keys dangling from one finger, and, before I could finish explaining, she cut me off. "You can't take care of me anymore," she said, voice flat, like she was reading from a script she'd already memorized. "I'm going to live with Richard." Richard, my ex-husband, the man who'd left us when she was 7, who'd missed every birthday, every recital, every midnight fever. The man who'd remarried a woman with money and suddenly had room for the daughter he'd forgotten. I asked her to stay, tried to keep my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. "We can figure this out together," I said. "I just need you here while I recover. Just for a little while." She laughed then, sharp and short, like I'd said something absurd. "I'm not your servant, Mom. Just get someone else to take care of you. Richard says I deserve better than this." She gestured vaguely at the apartment, at me, at the life I'd built from nothing to give her everything. The apartment we lived in wasn't much, but every piece of furniture had a story. The table I'd found at a yard sale and refinished myself, the bookshelf I'd built from instructions I could barely read, the curtains I'd sewn late at night after double shifts. I'd worked as a medical transcriptionist for 18 years, my fingers flying over keys until they ached, typing other people's diagnoses while ignoring my own exhaustion. Every penny I didn't spend on rent or food went into her college fund, her dance classes, her laptop, her future. She didn't know about the college fund yet. I'd kept it secret, wanting to surprise her senior year, wanting to see her face when I told her she could go anywhere she wanted, that I'd made sure of it. $73,000, built slowly over 15 years, every tax return, every overtime shift, every birthday where I told myself I didn't need anything as long as she had everything. I'd planned to tell her that weekend, to give her something to hold on to while I recovered. But she was already at the door, backpack adjusted, phone in her hand. "Richard's outside," she said. "He's helping me move my stuff this weekend." I wanted to ask if she'd packed already, if she'd been planning this, but my throat had closed around the question. Through the window, I could see his black SUV idling at the curb, engine running, wife in the passenger seat scrolling through her phone. They'd come prepared, like they'd been waiting for exactly this moment. After she left, the apartment felt enormous and suffocating at the same time, every corner echoing with absence. I sat there until the light changed, until the sounds of traffic outside blurred into white noise, until the pain medication pulled me under into dreams where she was small again, where she still reached for my hand crossing streets, where she still called me Mama instead of Mom, as if one syllable could measure the distance we'd traveled. The folder with the college fund paperwork sat in the drawer beside me, her name typed across the top in careful letters I'd printed at the library. I pulled it out slowly, thumbed through the statements, the projected growth charts, the scholarship applications I'd been researching. Every page was a prayer I'd written in numbers instead of words. Every deposit was a promise I'd kept to a future I thought we'd share. I placed it back in the drawer and locked it, the key cold against my palm. The first week after she left, I spent most of my time on the couch, leg elevated, staring at the ceiling where water stains had formed continents I'd never visit. Friends called the few I had left after years of putting her first, and I told them I was fine, just needed rest, would call them back soon. I didn't tell them she'd left, didn't explain the silence in the apartment, the meals I made for one that tasted like cardboard and disappointment. Physical therapy started the second week, twice a week at a clinic that smelled like rubber mats and determination. The therapist, a woman named Angela with kind eyes and strong hands, asked if I had help at home, someone to drive me, someone to check on me. I lied and said yes, smiled through the exercises, and took the bus home even though standing that long made my leg throb. Pride is expensive, but admitting you've been abandoned by your own child costs more than I could afford to pay. The disability payments came through smaller than I'd calculated, bureaucracy eating away at numbers that were already too small. I started selling things: the good blender I'd bought on sale, the vintage jewelry box my mother left me, the signed first edition book I'd found at an estate sale and kept because it made me feel like the kind of person who owned signed first editions. Every item went on Facebook Marketplace with cheerful descriptions and prices set just low enough that people wouldn't haggle. Richard never called to check on me. Neither did his wife. I imagined my daughter in their guest room, probably redecorated just for her, probably with furniture that matched, probably with a view better than the parking lot I'd stared at for 10 years. I wondered if they asked her about me, if she told them I was fine, if she mentioned me at all, or if I'd already become a story she'd learned to edit into something simpler, less complicated, easier to explain at dinner parties she'd attend in college. What she didn't know is that I'd already called the bank. The college fund was still in my name, set up as a custodial account that wouldn't transfer until she turned 21 or until I decided otherwise. I'd built it carefully, researched the legal structures, made sure I retained control until the right moment. The right moment was supposed to be graduation, a surprise wrapped in possibility, but circumstances, as they say, had changed, and so had my understanding of what she deserved versus what she'd earned. I also didn't tell her about the settlement. The accident that cost me my job had been someone else's fault: a delivery truck running a red light, a driver checking his phone, a split second that changed everything. My lawyer, a scrappy woman who worked on contingency, had warned me these things took time, that I shouldn't count on anything. But 3 weeks after my daughter left, she called with news. The trucking company wanted to settle, wanted to avoid trial, wanted to write a check that made the problem disappear. The amount was significant. Enough to cover medical bills, lost wages, pain and suffering, and then some. Enough to start over somewhere else, somewhere without memories pressed into every corner. Enough to prove that surviving doesn't require the people who left you behind. I told my lawyer to accept the offer, signed the paperwork with my left hand since my right still ached, and watched the numbers appear in my account like a quiet apology from a universe that had been screaming at me for months. That night, I revised my will. Removed my daughter's name completely, listed everything to go to charity, women's shelters, scholarship funds for first-generation college students, organizations that helped single mothers survive the impossible mathematics of raising children alone. I didn't do it from anger, though anger was there, glowing like embers that refused to die. I did it from clarity, from the understanding that love given without reciprocity isn't a virtue. It's a wound that never heals because you keep reopening it with your own hands, hoping this time will be different. 6 months passed like seasons. I watched through the window: spring rain, summer heat, fall leaves I couldn't rake because my leg still wasn't strong enough for yard work I didn't have a yard to do anyway. I moved to a new apartment, smaller but brighter, with a view of actual trees instead of asphalt. I started freelancing again, medical transcription from home, my fingers remembering rhythms they'd never really forgotten, my mind focusing on other people's ailments because it was easier than examining my own. My daughter's 18th birthday came and went. I didn't call. I didn't send a card. I thought about it, drafted messages I never sent, wrote her name on an envelope I never addressed. The college fund sat untouched, numbers growing slowly with interest, waiting for a decision I wasn't ready to make. Sometimes grief isn't loud, it's just a weight you carry so long you forget you're carrying it until someone asks why you're walking hunched over. Then Richard called. I almost didn't answer, the number unfamiliar, the timing suspicious, mid-afternoon on a Tuesday, when he should have been at work, when normal people don't call unless something has gone wrong. His voice was different, smaller somehow, missing the confidence I remembered from the rare occasions we'd spoken about custody payments he'd never quite managed to keep up with. "Claire," he said, "we need to talk about your daughter. She'd failed out of her first semester at college. Partied too much, skipped too many classes, stopped attending altogether by November. Richard had paid for everything: tuition, room, board, the meal plan she never used because she was too busy learning that freedom without discipline is just another word for drowning. He'd tried to guide her, he said, tried to set boundaries, but she'd pushed back, called him controlling, said he didn't understand her, that he'd never been there when it mattered. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. She keeps talking about her college fund, Richard said, voice strained. Says you promised her money for school. Says she wants to transfer somewhere else, start fresh, but she needs the fund released. I let the silence stretch, counted the seconds, listened to him breathe, uncomfortable, waiting, and used to having to ask me for anything. That fund, I finally said, was contingent on certain expectations. I think we both know she hasn't met them. He tried to argue. Tried to explain that she was still young, still learning, that everyone deserves second chances. I thought about all the chances I'd given her, every time I'd worked late so she could have new shoes, every birthday I'd celebrated alone because she wanted to be with friends, every recital I'd attended while he was busy building his new life with his new wife in his new house that suddenly had room for the child he'd discarded. She made her choice, I said. She told me to find someone else to take care of me. I'm simply taking her advice. The conversation ended badly. He called me vindictive, cruel, unable to understand that young people make mistakes. I told him that adults face consequences, that maybe if he'd taught her that earlier, we wouldn't be having this conversation. He hung up first, which felt appropriate, given his history of walking away when things got difficult. I sat with the phone in my hand, screen dark, feeling something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but wasn't regret either, just a strange flatness, like standing on a plateau after a long climb. 2 weeks later, she showed up. I'd just gotten home from physical therapy, leg finally strong enough to walk without limping, when I heard the knock. Through the peephole, I saw her, older somehow, tired, carrying a duffel bag that looked too heavy for her shoulders. I thought about not answering, about pretending I wasn't home, but something, curiosity maybe, or the stubborn hope that refuses to die even when it should, made me open the door. She looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "Mom," she said, voice smaller than I remembered, "I made a mistake. Can I come home?" The word home caught in the air between us, sharp-edged, complicated, meaning different things to both of us. I thought about the apartment she'd walked out of, the life she'd dismissed, the mother she'd called a servant. I thought about the college fund sitting in my account, numbers that meant nothing to her until she needed them, like I meant nothing until she had nowhere else to go. I let her in, but I didn't let her stay. We sat at my small kitchen table, the same one from before, the one I'd refinished, the one she'd barely noticed when she left, and I listened while she explained. Richard and his wife had grown tired of her, tired of the rebellion, tired of the late nights and the expenses and the drama that came with a teenager who'd never been told no until it was too late to learn what the word meant. College had been harder than she'd expected. The classes required discipline she'd never developed. The social scene demanded money she didn't have. The independence she'd craved turned out to be loneliness dressed in different clothes. She'd failed out not because she was stupid, but because she'd never learned that wanting something wasn't the same as working for it, that showing up was half the battle, that nobody cares about your potential if you don't bother to prove it. "I need the college fund," she said, hands wrapped around the mug of tea I'd made her out of habit, out of muscle memory that remembered making her hot chocolate after school, back when she still came home. "I want to start over somewhere smaller, community college maybe, prove I can do it. Then transfer back to a 4-year school. I just need the money you saved for me." She said it like it was hers by right, like the fund wasn't mine to control, like her absence and her words and her laughter hadn't changed the mathematics of who owed what to whom. I told her the truth then, slowly, carefully, watching her face change as the words landed. The fund was still in my name. I'd never transferred it. I'd planned to, after graduation, after she'd proven she was ready, but she'd left before we got there, before she'd earned it, before she'd shown me that the investment I'd made in her future was something she valued beyond its dollar amount. "You walked away," I said. "You told me I couldn't take care of you. You chose Richard because he could give you things I couldn't. I respected that choice. Her face flushed red, anger rising like a tide I'd seen before. The same anger she'd shown when I'd told her she couldn't have a car at 16, couldn't skip school to go to a concert, couldn't have everything she wanted just because she wanted it. That money is mine, she said, voice rising. You saved it for me. You can't just keep it because you're mad I left. That's not fair. I felt something cold settle in my chest, something that had been soft before and hardened during the months of silence. Fair, I repeated, tasting the word. You want to talk about fair? I spent 18 years making sure you had everything. I worked jobs that broke my body so you could have dance classes and new clothes and a future that looked better than mine. I saved every penny I could spare and some I couldn't, to give you opportunities one never had. And when I needed you, not your money, not your sacrifice, just your presence while I healed, you laughed at me and left. My voice didn't rise, didn't crack, just stayed level, steady, like water wearing away stone. She tried to argue, tried to say she'd been young, scared, didn't understand. I didn't interrupt. I let her talk until she ran out of words, until the silence filled the space again, heavy and uncomfortable. Then I told her about the settlement, about the money from the accident, about how I'd survived without her, rebuilt without her, learned to live in the space her absence created. The college fund is gone, I said. I donated it. All of it. To scholarship programs for students whose parents can't help them, whose families abandon them, who have to build their own futures from nothing. It wasn't entirely true. Half the fund was still there, sitting in my account, waiting. But she didn't need to know that. She needed to understand what loss felt like, what it meant to count on something that disappeared, to reach for help and find empty air. She needed to learn the lesson I'd been teaching her whole life, the one she'd refused to hear, that people aren't resources to be used and discarded, that love has limits even when it doesn't want to. That choices have consequences that echo longer than the moment they're made. She left crying, duffel bag dragging behind her, and I watched from the window as she got into a rideshare, probably heading back to Richard's house, probably calling him right now to tell him how cruel I was, how unreasonable, how I'd stolen her future. I felt something crack inside me then, something that had been barely holding together, and I cried too, not from sadness, but from the exhausting work of loving someone who never learned how to love you back. A year passed. I finished physical therapy, started working full-time again, moved to a better apartment with a balcony where I grew herbs in mismatched pots. I made friends, careful ones, the kind who understood that trust was something you built slowly, that history mattered, that showing up counted more than promises. I didn't hear from my daughter, didn't expect to, didn't check her social media even though sometimes late at night I thought about it. The scholarship fund I'd created real now, not a lie, started paying out its first awards. 10 students, all from difficult circumstances, all working multiple jobs, all determined to build something better. I got letters from them, handwritten thank yous that mentioned single mothers and late shifts and the impossible choice between textbooks and groceries. Each one felt like a small redemption, not for what I'd lost, but for what I'd chosen to create from the loss. Richard called once more, Christmas Eve, drunk probably, nostalgic definitely. He asked if I'd reconsider, said she was struggling, said she needed her mother. I asked if he'd considered that she'd needed her father for 11 years before he decided she was convenient again. He hung up. I poured myself wine and watched lights twinkle on the tree I'd bought for myself, small and slightly crooked but mine, decorated with ornaments that had no history, no ghosts, just present tense. The remaining half of the college fund, the part I'd kept, the part she didn't know existed, sat in my account like a question without an answer. Some days I thought about releasing it, sending her a check, letting her try again. Other days I thought about donating it too, closing that chapter completely, accepting that some relationships don't survive the weight of their own expectations. Most days I just left it alone, numbers on a screen that meant everything and nothing, a door neither fully open nor completely closed. What she'll never know, what I'll probably never tell her, is that I check on her sometimes through mutual acquaintances, through the small-town gossip network that moves like water through cracks. She's working retail now, taking night classes at community college, doing better apparently, growing up slowly the way people do when they finally have to. Part of me is proud. Part of me is still angry. Most of me is just tired, the kind of tired that comes from carrying love that nowhere to go. I rewrote my will again, this time more carefully. The scholarship fund would continue after I'm gone, fully funded, sustainable, touching lives I'd never meet. The remaining college money, should she ever prove she's ready for it, should she ever apologize not with words, but with changed behavior, would be held in trust, contingent on graduation, contingent on proof that she'd learned what sacrifice meant, contingent on her understanding that forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's just choosing to put down a weight you're tired of carrying. Sometimes I dream about her as a child, small hands reaching up to be held, voice calling mama with total trust, believing I could fix anything, believing I always would be there. In the dreams, I pick her up, hold her close, and neither of us knows yet how the story ends, how love can break and bend and still somehow remain, transformed, complicated, real. I wake up with my face wet, not sure if I'm crying for who she was or who we both became, if there's even a difference anymore. The balcony herbs are thriving. I make tea from them in the mornings, sit with my coffee, watch the city wake up below me. This isn't the life I planned when I was saving quarters in a jar labeled her future, isn't what I imagined during those midnight shifts when my eyes burned and my fingers ached and I kept typing anyway, because that's what mothers do. But it's the life I have now, built from the rubble of expectations that didn't survive contact with reality. And some mornings, when the light hits the leaves just right, it's enough.